The woman they tried to remove from the building had memorized 3 things before she even reached the front steps: the badge number of the officer standing at the east entrance, the name stitched above the breast pocket of the one who held the door open for someone else and let it close in her face, and the fact that the security camera mounted above the main lobby door had been rotated roughly 12 degrees off-center, far enough that its blind spot covered almost the entire left side of the entrance. Her name was Diane Okafor. Wait, no, let's do this properly, because the story of what happened that Tuesday morning at the Albrecht Financial Tower in downtown Toronto deserves to be told from the very beginning. Her name was Camille Osiado. She was 44 years old. She wore a gray canvas jacket she'd bought at a farmer's market in Kensington 3 summers ago, dark jeans with a small bleach stain near the left knee from a cleaning accident she'd never bothered to fix, and a pair of flat brown shoes that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back simply. She carried no briefcase, no designer bag, just a worn canvas tote with the logo of a Halifax food bank printed on the side, the kind of bag you got for donating $20. She looked, by every measure of surface judgment, like someone who did not belong in the lobby of one of the most prestigious private equity firms in Canada. That was, of course, precisely the point. Camille had been doing this for 11 years. Not this. Not walking into buildings where people looked through her. She had been running Ose Capital Partners for 11 years, the firm she founded at 33, with a seed investment of $400,000 she had earned, saved, and refused to spend on anything that would signal to anyone that she had it. Ose Capital now managed $3.2 billion in assets. She had been named to the Financial Post's Power 50 list 4 years in a row, though the photo they always ran made her look more serious than she felt. She sat on the board of 2 national banks and a children's hospital in Edmonton. She gave quietly, and she dressed even more quietly, and she had learned years ago that the moment you stopped announcing yourself, you started learning who people actually were. She learned a great deal that Tuesday. The lobby of the Albrecht Tower was all marble and controlled light, the kind of building that communicated wealth through what it chose not to say. Camille pushed through the revolving door and walked toward the reception desk, her shoes clicking once on the polished floor before she reached the carpet runner that absorbed all sound. There were 2 men at the security station to the left of the main desk. One was tall, young, with a jaw that could have been carved. His name tag read Fuller. The other was older, heavier, with the particular expression of someone who had made up their mind about something before they had any information to base it on. His tag read Scott. There was a woman at the reception desk, early 30s, blonde, impeccably presented, speaking into a headset with the kind of practiced pleasantness that costs companies good money to train. Camille walked to her. "Good morning," Camille said. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock. The receptionist glanced up, then glanced back down at her screen. "Name? Camille Osiado. I'm expected. I have a meeting with Warren Caldwell and the executive team." A pause. The kind of pause that lasted 1 second too long. The receptionist typed something, looked at the screen, typed again. Her smile when she looked back up was still practiced but had lost something in the translation. "I'm sorry, I don't see. Could you spell the last name?" Camille spelled it. The receptionist typed. Another pause. "I'm showing a Camille listed here, but the file has been flagged as, it just says to be confirmed. I'll need to call upstairs." She reached for the phone. That was when Scott walked over. He did not walk over the way a person walks over to offer assistance. He walked over the way a person walks over when they have already decided what the situation is. "Ma'am." He said it the way people say it when they don't mean it as respect. "Can I help you?" "I'm being helped," Camille said. She kept her voice even and her eyes on the receptionist. "I'll take it from here, Jess." He said that to the receptionist without looking at her. Jess, to her credit, looked uncertain, her hand still on the phone, not quite hanging it up, not quite dialing. Scott stepped between Camille and the desk. Camille looked at him. She noted his badge number, 4417, and the way he held his shoulders, and the coffee stain on the left cuff of his uniform that told her he'd had a rushed morning, and the slight tightening around his eyes that told her he had already categorized her and filed her away. "I have a 9 o'clock meeting," she said. "This is a private facility, ma'am. Access is by confirmed appointment only." "I have a confirmed appointment. The system isn't showing." The receptionist was in the process of verifying it when you interrupted. Something moved across Scott's face. Not embarrassment, he was past the age of that. Fuller had drifted closer without being called. He stood a few feet back, arms crossed, watching. Camille looked at him too. Badge 4389, name above the pocket. Fuller. The way he stood, weight on the back foot, chin slightly raised, told her everything about who had trained him and in what kind of environment. "I'd like you to step back," Scott said, "and wait over there while we sort this out." He gestured toward a set of chairs near the far wall, the kind of chairs that sat next to a small table with magazines no one had read and a plant that needed watering. The waiting area for people who had not yet been confirmed as worth speaking to. Camille did not move toward the chairs. "I would prefer," she said, "to wait here while your colleague completes the call she was making." Scott stepped closer. Not touching. Not yet. But the geometry of the moment shifted. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to." "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from the elevators. A man in his late 50s, silver-haired, in a suit that announced itself. His name was Gerald Ashworth-Blaine, and he was Albrecht Financial's chief operating officer, and he had stepped out of the elevator at exactly the wrong moment to be entirely innocent in this story. He looked at the lobby with the practiced scan of a man used to managing the optics of spaces. He saw Scott. He saw Fuller. He saw Camille. He saw, specifically, the canvas tote with the food bank logo. "Is this woman bothering you?" he said to Scott. And that was when something changed. Not in the room. In Camille. She did this without effort anymore. It had become reflex, the same way a musician hears off-key notes without deciding to. She had been counting the things that were happening, the decisions that were being made about her without her, the small but measurable architecture of what was unfolding. She counted Gerald Ashworth-Blaine. She noted the question he had asked. She noted that he had directed it to a security guard rather than to her. She filed all of it away. "Take her outside," Gerald said, still to Scott and not to Camille. Fuller moved first. He put a hand on Camille's arm. She looked down at the hand, then she looked up at Fuller. "I would strongly advise you to remove that," she said. Fuller did not remove it. He tightened his grip slightly and began steering her toward the door. Camille walked. She walked calmly, which seemed to confuse Fuller because he had expected resistance and had calibrated his force for it. She walked calmly and she looked at everything. The camera above the door, still 12 degrees off. The faces of 3 people in the lobby who were watching, a courier near the side wall, a woman in a pantsuit who had frozen in the middle of signing something at the desk, a young man in a gray blazer whose mouth had opened slightly, and Jess at the reception desk who had set the phone down and whose expression had become very carefully neutral. Outside on King Street, Fuller released her arm and stepped back. The morning was cool. October in Toronto, the kind that smells like coffee and wet leaves. A streetcar went by. "You need to leave the property," Fuller said. "This is a public sidewalk," Camille said pleasantly. He didn't have an answer for that. He stood in the doorway, uncertain now that the momentum of the action was gone, and watched her pull out her phone. She made one call. It lasted 45 seconds. She did not raise her voice. Then she put her phone in the pocket of her gray jacket and stood on the public sidewalk outside the Albrecht Financial Tower, and she looked up at the building, and she thought about the view from the 14th floor where she had sat in a meeting 6 weeks ago with Albrecht's founding partner, who had asked very politely whether OC Capital Partners would be willing to consider a partnership that would give Albrecht access to Camille's portfolio of infrastructure investments across Western Canada. She thought about the letter of intent they had sent, the one that had been sitting, reviewed, and marked up in the canvas tote with the food bank logo. Inside the lobby, the elevator opened again. This time it was a woman Camille had met before. Her name was Bernadette. Wait, no. The woman who stepped out of the elevator was named Patricia Chow, and she was Albrecht's head of external partnerships and had flown in from Vancouver specifically for this morning's meeting. And the moment she came through the lobby, she looked around and did not see who she was looking for. And that particular kind of controlled alarm crossed her face that professionals get when something has gone wrong, and they don't yet know the scale of it. She spoke to Jess. Jess pointed at the door. Patricia Chow walked to the door, and then through it, and then she stopped. Camille lifted one hand in a small wave. Patricia did not wave back. She stared. Then she turned around and went back inside, and through the glass Camille could see her walking very quickly toward Gerald Ashworth-Blaine, and she could see the moment the conversation registered on his face. It was the kind of moment where a person realizes the floor they were standing on was not the floor they thought. Gerald turned and looked at the door. At Camille, standing on the other side of it. Camille looked back at him. She was still pleasant. She had no interest in being otherwise. The door opened. It was Scott. His badge was still 4417. His posture was different now. The certainty had gone out of it, to look like it had not been certainty to begin with. "Ma'am," he said, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding. If you'd like to come back inside, is my name confirmed in the system?" Camille asked. He hesitated. Yes, Ms. Ose-Addo. I apologize, Thank you," she said. She walked back in. The lobby felt different the second time. Or maybe the lobby was the same, and the people in it had recalibrated. The courier near the wall had stopped pretending to look at his clipboard. The woman in the pantsuit was still watching. The young man in the gray blazer had his phone out now. She clocked it, noted it, didn't acknowledge it. Jess at the desk looked like she wanted to say something and couldn't find the right word for it. Camille gave her a small nod as she passed. Gerald Ashworth-Blaine was still standing near the elevator bank. He had arranged his face into an expression that was reaching for authority, but landing somewhere closer to exposure. "Miss Ose-Addo," he said, "I want to offer my personal apology." "I'm sure you do," Camille said. She pressed the elevator button. "Is Warren upstairs?" "He is. Yes. I'll come up and explain." "That's all right," she said. "I suspect I already have everything I need." The elevator opened. She stepped in. She turned, and for one moment she looked at Gerald Ashworth-Blaine standing in his lobby, and at Scott standing near the desk, and at Fuller, who had retreated back to his post and was looking at the floor. The doors closed. On the 14th floor, Warren Caldwell met her with the expression of a man who had just received a very specific kind of phone call. He was tall, measured, the sort of executive who had learned over decades that the most useful thing he could do in a crisis was be very still. "Camille," he said, "I just heard. I am genuinely, deeply—" "Warren," she said, "let's sit down." They sat. Patricia Chow was already there, and two others from the executive team whose names Camille knew, but who had not yet earned a central role in this particular morning. She set the canvas tote on the table. She removed from it the folder she had prepared, marked up letter of intent, supporting documents, her team's analysis of the proposed partnership structure. She set it in front of her. Everyone at the table looked at the folder and then at her, and then at nothing in particular. "Before we begin," Warren said carefully, "I want you to know that what happened downstairs is not. It doesn't reflect how this firm—" "What it reflects," Camille said, "is information, and I appreciate having it." She opened the folder. "Now, page 3, the indemnity clause. Your legal team has flagged section 4.2, and I understand why. But I think if we look at the comparable structure we used with the Northern Gateway arrangement, there's a solution here that works for both sides." And she proceeded to run the meeting. She ran it for 2 hours. She ran it the way she ran everything, with precision and no wasted words, and the quiet authority of someone who has earned every inch of the ground they stand on. She answered questions. She countered proposals. She drew one diagram on the whiteboard with a marker that was running dry, and she made it work. At the end of 2 hours, the letter of intent had been revised on 4 points in OC Capital's favor. At no point did anyone mention what had happened in the lobby. At no point did anyone need to. Camille packed the folder back into her canvas tote and said goodbye to the room and took the elevator back down to the lobby. She walked across the marble, her shoes quiet on the carpet runner, and she pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the October morning. Fuller was still at the security station. He watched her leave. She did not look at him. She had what she came for. She had, in fact, more than what she came for, what no one in that building knew yet. What would be known, eventually through the very specific channels through which these things become known, was that Camille's call on the sidewalk had lasted 45 seconds because it had reached the inbox of a regulatory body that had been quietly reviewing Albrecht Financial's compliance documentation for the past 3 months, and her account of the morning's events would become part of a formal record, not as punishment, as information. Information was, Camille had always believed, the only power that lasted. The footage from the lobby would later be reviewed. Not the camera above the door, the one that was 12 degrees off, with the blind spot on the left side of the entrance. The other one, the one mounted at the far end of the lobby near the magazine table, the one whose angle Camille had clocked on her first visit 6 weeks ago. That camera had a clear view of the entire entrance. Every moment of it, Fuller's hand on her arm. Gerald Ashworth-Blaine's question, directed at the guard, not at her. The deliberate sideways steer toward the door. All of it, clearly and completely visible. The young man in the gray blazer, whose name, it would turn out, was Tobias Hearn, a junior analyst at a firm that occupied the 3rd floor, had not in fact been filming on his phone. He had been texting someone. But he gave a statement anyway, because he had watched the whole thing and he had recognized her immediately from the Financial Post profile his mother had shown him the year before, and he had thought for a long moment about whether to say something, and had decided that the cost of saying nothing was higher than the cost of speaking. That, too, was information. Gerald Ashworth-Blaine submitted his resignation 6 weeks later. It was described in internal communications as a mutual decision, and perhaps it was, by then. Scott, badge 44 when was placed on administrative review pending an investigation into the documented interaction. The union provided representation. What came of it would take months and is not properly the end of this story. Fuller, badge 4389, was younger and had more ahead of him. What he did with that is a separate question. The partnership between OC Capital Partners and Albrecht Financial was finalized in the spring. It was announced in a press release that ran to 4 paragraphs and mentioned nothing about a canvas tote or a revolving door or the particular quality of the October air on King Street. Camille gave one interview about it. She was asked what the process had been like. She said the due diligence had been thorough and that she felt confident the partnership reflected shared values and that she was looking forward to the work. She was not asked about the lobby. No one knew to ask. But here is the thing about lobbies, about marble floors and security stations and the careful management of who gets to move through a space without being questioned. They are full of cameras and people and information, and some people walk into rooms already knowing everything they're going to learn there. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever walked into a room and felt the exact shape of someone's assumptions before they'd finished forming, drop a comment below. Tell us what you would have done in Camille's position. Tell us what the right thing is when the room has already decided. Because the conversation doesn't end when the elevator closes. If you found value in this story, please take a moment to like and share it. It helps this channel reach people who are looking for exactly this kind of content. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Velvet Honor. We tell the stories that remind you what grace under pressure actually looks like. We'll see you in the next one.